Going live, going live. All right, we are live. And hey, Derek and Dave, you guys are officially the biggest fans of this series because you were at this stream before even I was. So, congratulations. For everyone else, hello, I am HP Hollow. I write stuff, and I am here tonight to host the launch party for Book 2 of Monster Punk Horizon. Isekai Skies. So we're going to have a fun time tonight. It's going to be lots of readings and chatting and prizes and all sorts of things. Let me get my show notes because I left them over on the bed. And all right. So obligatory buy my book stuff. Monster Punk Horizon 2 is out as of today on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited and in paperback. It's going to be available very soon in audio as well. It's kind of in Audible limbo right now, but book 1 came out about a week or two after I approved it, so hopefully it'll be very soon. But again, hello everyone who is here. Hello Derek, hello Dave, hello everyone else watching. We got a few others. And I am just going to describe what we're going to do today. So we are going to chat about some of the ideas that went into Isekai Skies. I'm going to do a few little readings from it. But the exciting part is that I'm doing prizes galore. So let me get my little banner up for you guys to explain how these work, because we're doing 2 contests again. Okay, show. All right, so contest number 1, same as last time. I'm giving away copies of Isekai Skies. I don't know how many. I guess it kind of comes down to how many I have in the box or just whenever I get bored of picking names. Anyway, just leave a comment. Everyone who comments automatically gets entered to win a copy, and so that's fun. But if you're one of those awesome people who has already bought your copy, I love you. But I'm doing an additional contest where if you either personal message or email me your confirmation number from Amazon where you purchased the book, you will be entered to win a signed copy of both Book 2 and the upcoming Book 3. So, do that. You can email me at hphollowlol@gmail.com if you're on one of the streaming services that doesn't have a direct message option. So there's that. It's going to be streaming at the bottom the whole time, so all the information will be there. And now, let's see what's next. So I've gone over prizes. I've gone over all that stuff. All right. So I've done a bunch of other videos this week, which you should totally catch up on because they're fun. But for those who haven't had a chance to watch them, before our first reading, I'm going to do a short little summary of what exactly Isekai Skies is about. Now, Book 1 followed Pix and Jaz, 2 Monster Hunter pals, as they went and hunted monsters and tried to survive. Book 2 is slightly different in that it still follows Pix and Jaz to a certain extent, but it introduces a new character whose name is Kaito, and he is unique because he is not from the world under the dazzling skies at all. He's very much an outsider. He's in the middle. If you were listening to the last video I made, he was in the middle of a convention and cosplaying and proposing to his girlfriend when suddenly the floor opened up beneath him and suddenly he's fallen through the sky over this ocean in the midst of a bunch of weird Monster Hunter cosplayers, and he's like, what's going on? He soon finds out that he may or may not be inside a game world, and he's basically got to figure out how to survive so he can get back to his girlfriend/fiance. And fortunately or unfortunately, he has Pix and Jaz and everyone else there to help him. So that is his story. Let me get back to my comments here. I left them on the wrong page. So, hey, it's Rose Poppy Cosplay. Hey, good to see you again. We got a fun crowd here tonight, so yes. All right, so let me see what I'm reading first. I have a whole page of notes here, and in classic HP fashion, I cannot read a single one of them. All right. All right, so with Isekai Skies, Book 1 of the series is very obviously an homage to Monster Hunter, the video game series. Book 2, there's a lot of Monster Hunter inspiration in it as well, but as you can guess from the title, it also has a lot of isekai inspirations. Isekai being the sort of portal fantasy anime where the main character usually gets hit by a truck and falls into another world and has to learn how to be awesome there. And so there have developed a lot of identifiable tropes in isekai recently, And I really wanted to use this book to play around with those tropes a lot. Like there's always a demon lord, there's always this thing the character has to get and stuff like that. And so you'll see some of that in the excerpt I'm about to read now. You'll also see the main character, Kaito, trying to navigate this weird new world that he's in. Kaito ended up being somewhat of a different character than I expected him to be. When I first started writing Isekai Skies, I actually just wanted to take kind of a standard normal dude isekai hero and just drop him into the setting. But as I started writing him, as my characters do, he kind of took on a life of his own. And the character that you meet is not from a normal society. He's from a very, very far future society where he's accustomed to having access to stats in the form of, like medical data and stuff like that. But to him, it basically reads like stats. And so he has to get used to not having stats in this video game-ish setting. And so there's that he has to contend with as well. What else did I have to write? I got to get water. I'm talking too fast. I need to breathe. The excerpt I'm about to read also gives you a short look into how my thought process works when I'm writing. It's really absurd how much of what actually makes it to the page is related to whatever is going on around me in the immediate time that I am writing it. I do a lot of writing in busy spaces, whether outside or in coffee shops or in things in places like that. And there's always interesting stuff going on. There's always interesting stuff laying around. And when I was working on this chapter, I just happened to be writing amidst a very messy house. And so I'm writing the chapter, and you see a little bit of this in chapter 4 too. I'm writing this area, and I need something to move the scene along, some kind of little detail or gimmick that I can play with. And so I just start looking around my living room, like, what can I use? What can I use? And then I alight on a box of Cards Against Humanity cards. And suddenly I have the brilliant idea to base part of this scene, or what happens in this scene, on randomly drawn Cards Against Humanity cards. This is introduced a little bit in chapter 4, where the characters pick up this box where it fell from the sky, and they don't know exactly what it's supposed to be for because the instruction booklet didn't fall with it. But they use it for everything from determining charades to various other things, including determining what kind of goddess Jaz pretends to be whenever she greets characters like Kaito to the world. And so it's another one of those random little chaotic things that worked its way into my imagination and eventually made it to the final version of the book. So with that setup, I am going to read you the first chapter, or not the first chapter, what am I saying? I'm going to read you the beginning of chapter 5, which is itself titled Isekai Skies. Oh, hey, Reese, you're here too. I've got all sorts of people joining me. Yay! And Dave is back. Yes. All right. We're having a nice little party here. We got a good little crowd. All right. Chapter 5, Isekai Skies. Cheers and groans rose up as bags of something exchanged hands around the canteen, but Kaito was too distracted to make sense of that. By the way, in the previous chapter, it's established that all the hunters are betting on various things that he's going to say. Once he'd adjusted to the glare of the suns in the environment, he saw that there was a beautiful, if ragged-looking woman in an absurd red dress towering over him, grinning as if she'd been waiting all day to welcome him to the afterlife. "Looks that way," she exclaimed. "In what other situation would you die and wake up next to a smoking hot goddess?" "I didn't die. This is a virus," Kaito insisted. He thinks he's in basically a video game virus. And waited for the world around him to dissolve back to WyvernCon. It didn't. "Rude," the goddess declared. "Wait, a virus? I got this," said a second voice. A giant cat girl walked up behind the goddess. She wasn't like the cat girls Kaito was used to, the gene-modified cosplayers that were basically humans with cat ears and furry tails. She was 7 feet tall, with blue fur, a distinctly feline face, an explosive mane of fiber-optic-looking hair, and a voice that sounded like she was either high on something or just very relaxed. The cat girl crouched beside Kaito. "What kind of hardware you got?" she asked. "Implants? Nanobots? I'm assuming it's not external input, otherwise you'd just take it off to escape the virus, am I right?" "Well, that was unexpectedly coherent." "Nanites," Kaito replied. "Ah, close," the cat girl continued. I worked with stuff like that back on Iraq. You did all your system checks? Tried a hard reboot? Yes, Kaito replied slowly. This really was a complex virus. Had it monitored his reaction to infection solely so it could regurgitate it for this process? Then what's your tell? The cat girl asked. Tell? Kaito repeated. Your people dream, right? Yes, Kaito replied. You know how when you're dreaming, there's always a detail or two that lets you know the dream's not real? Like an out-of-place object or a missing sense. Oh, right. Kaito saw where she was going with this and decided to go along with it in hopes that it would trigger the closing process faster. In his case, the entire setting was an out-of-place object, so his only option was to evaluate his sensory inputs and mods. And then another horrible realization sank in. He could feel the coarse, splintery texture of the table on his back. The suns above beat down on him with a brutal, uncomfortable heat. The ambient jungle noises and canteen smells would be easy enough for a virus to emulate, but he could taste the tropical moisture in the air on his tongue, and no prank virus was detailed enough to do all those things at once. Heck, even professionally produced IVGs, immersive video games, sorry, I forgot my own words, only influence taste buds during eating animations. He hadn't experienced the world like this since the day before his 12th birthday, the last day he lived completely free of his nanite mods. All of his sensory information right now was purely physical. He couldn't feel the modifying presence of his nanites. He couldn't feel them at all. Which suggested that the bizarre cosplay canteen he was seeing now was in fact his reality. What the actual heck, he said. There's the reaction we're used to, the cat girl exclaimed, delighted. My good deed for the day is done. Continue. Kaito's mind reeled as she bowed to concede the floor to the goddess. How could this be real? How could any of this be real? Normally it comforted him to ask questions. Heck, his entire generation had grown up being taught to hyperanalyze every piece of information that came its way. A cultural scar from when a wildly complex and completely fabricated disaster had led to the prolonged deepfake wars. Where he came from, it was a person's intellectual and social duty to be able to parse the real information from the spin and sometimes complete BS that their leaders spouted. Generally, those skills served him well. But no question that came to his mind even remotely applied to this situation. He had no schema for this. And then it occurred to him. He did have a schema for this, in the form of every isekai anime Frankie had forced him to watch over the past 4 years. He sighed. It was better than nothing, he supposed, and so he sat up from the table and prepared himself to think. His glasses had fallen down the bridge of his nose. He pushed them back up with a glint. That singular gesture elicited a small roar of cheers from a nearby table. He did the thing! Someone shouted. Kaito peered over to see a table of adventurers surrendering or accepting more bags from each other. Currency, perhaps? Were they gambling on his responses? They must have been, and the enthusiasm of their responses would imply they had some sort of precedent for the activity, some way to determine odds. He wasn't the first person they'd bet on. And this goddess strutting before him must have been central to it all. Yeah, this place can be a bit of a rude awakening for someone who's used to, well, literally anything else, she said, especially after an untimely death. You say I died, Kaito stated matter-of-factly. How? What do you mean? Shouldn't you know? You're the goddess, shouldn't you know? I'm not the goddess of knowing how everyone dies. It doesn't work like that. What are you the goddess of? Inexplicably, the goddess pulled a little white card from inside her cleavage, read it, and said, Dim titties. What? That's what the card says. I don't make the rules. Kaito's face crumpled. He'd seen women designed for IVG viruses before, and all of them looked like something from the wet dreams of a 14-year-old boy whose knowledge of female anatomy started and ended at anime boobs. Yet, while this goddess was certainly sultry in her own way, her shape was not one that required its own separate set of physics to function. I don't want to be rude, but shouldn't a goddess of dim titties have more ridiculous those? They get the job done. Besides, you ever met a boob you didn't like? Kaito's face reddened. I can't say I have that much experience. More cheers and groans rose up as more money, no, were those actual jewels, exchanged hands. What is this place? He asked. What brought me here? You tell me, the goddess said. Where were you before you came to the afterlife? I was at Wyvern Con, celebrating my college graduation. I was proposing to my girlfriend. She accepted, and then the floor collapsed, and I woke up here. The cheers and groans halted then, as if the crowd didn't know how to react to that, as if that kind of explanation hadn't factored into whatever they were betting on. And then another thought bashed into his head. Oh my God, is Frankie here? Where is she? Who's Frankie? My girlfriend, my fiancée. The goddess turned to the cat girl. Hottie, did you see anyone else over the ocean? Nah, I'd have caught him if I did, the cat girl, Hottie, replied. No way would I turn down a chance for double earnings. Over the ocean, Kaito said, so she could have fallen into the ocean. Nah, the dump today was too small, Hottie replied. We would have seen her. She's probably safe, back wherever you came from. Well, there was that at least, for what it was worth, if it was worth anything. So, why am I here then? He asked. Heck if I know, the goddess shrugged. Why are any of us here? Kaito pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. He hadn't expected this to go smoothly, but he'd at least expected something like obvious answers from this goddess, if she even was a goddess. After all, for being the one who was supposed to guide him to the afterlife, she was doing an awful lot of everything but guiding. And what kind of goddess greeted her charges in the middle of an open-air canteen that smelled of hard labor and fur? May as well go for the most obvious questions and hope for the best. His glasses followed his hand as he pulled it away, so he pushed them back up his nose. That one table freaked out because he did the thing again, and with a determined glint in his eyes, he began his next line of questioning. Do I get any special powers or skills now that I'm here? If you train, the goddess replied. How do I see my stats then? You don't see them so much as have them. Then how will I know when I'm getting stronger? When it's easy to kill a monster that used to be hard to kill. So there are monsters here, buttloads, and we kill them to level up. Well, specifically to research them, manage the populations, wear their skin as armor, and eat them, but if it's easier for you to think of it as leveling up, sure. Kaito suppressed another sigh. Those didn't sound like isekai tropes, they sounded like regular life. Well, except for the monster-specific bits, but worse because he didn't have access to even the basic health stats that his nanites would provide. He may not have had any special skills back home, at least in the isekai sense, but he'd at least been able to assign numbers to his medical data, which was something like stats, and had been useful for helping him figure out what kind of nutrition he'd needed to print for that day. Still, may as well ask the final question. Is there a demon king I'm supposed to defeat? There is the Screecher, the goddess replied, but no one expects you to defeat it on your own. It took all of us a few monsters and a secret weapon just to knock it down a bit. For once, that reply gave him a bit of hope. So I can go home once it's defeated. Nah, the goddess raspberry. There's no way to go back. Our wyverns can't fly high enough and off-world tech freaks out near the portals. That's probably why your nanites aren't working. Nanites, both Hati and Kaito corrected. Whatever, the portals fried them. They fry every electronic thing that gets too close. So, there's no goal, no bad guy to defeat, no world to be saved. Not specifically. Then what is even the point? What's the point of anything? The goddess shrugged. Welcome to your existential crisis. No, I mean, what's the point of me being here? Kaito shouted. People don't just fall into other worlds by accident. Actually, here, yeah, they do. All the time. And that's the end of that excerpt. So, I got a ton of comments while I was reading. Let's see here. Derek says, the food in this book sounds so good. Yes, speaking of food, I freaking love food. And so I love writing about food. And a fun little fact about this particular series. One of the reasons why it's so food heavy is because Monster Hunter itself, and really increasingly a lot of JRPGs, place an incredible amount of detail in the food. And it's not just the visual detail of the food, it's the specific stats you can get from eating specific foods. And I really, really love that aspect of gaming. I will play sometimes. I will play certain games just because the food looks good. Like one of the main reasons why I am playing Final Fantasy 15 right now, I get all the Final Fantasies mixed up, is totally because there's one character who's a cook and he's hot and all of his food looks delicious. And I came in on my husband when he was playing one of Ignis's cooking scenes once, and I was like, I want to play that game. And so that's the story of why I play certain games. But also, I really love to describe food. Like, I love all things food related. I love, when it comes to cooking, of course I like eating, but I also really love to experiment with how flavors complement each other. And like, I'm not a professional cook by any means, but I really, really like to test different flavor profiles against each other and whatnot. And there was a period where my husband had to drastically change his diet because of heart issues. And he basically came to me and was like, Heather, we got to change things up. I got to eat no fat and stuff like that. And he expected me to be really sad about it, but I was like, oh, this is a culinary challenge. And through that, I basically, it was kind of a necessary thing for me to figure out how to make food delicious again for him so that he could stay on this diet. And it was one of the things where it was kind of sad that he had to stop eating fat, but we also, like, it really, really broadened my horizons in terms of ingredients I can use to be able to make healthier, tastier food. But anyway, back to the story. One of the things I do in Monster Punk Horizon when I have writer's block, if I just need to start a scene and don't really have any specific story content to work with, I describe food. And that is my way to get out of writer's block. So if you see any really long food scenes, that's usually how they originated. And in fact, I love writing food so much that one of the upcoming books I have planned right now, I have finished books 1 through 3 of Monster Punk Horizon, but I do have the next 4 tentatively planned. And one of them is actually a food-themed novel. The tentative title is Canteen Wars, and it's basically a mashup of Monster Hunter and the Food Wars anime, which if you like food and you have not seen Food Wars, you absolutely need to watch it. It's amazing. And I've tried to recreate some of the recipes from Food Wars too, and they're amazing too. So if you are a foodie at all, watch Food Wars. It's incredible. So that's the food story. Back to my comments and water because my throat is already drying out. Let's see. Oh, more food. Everybody loves food. You're reading a good series if you like food. And let's see. Dave says he's never enjoyed reading in published, so this is something that makes me anxious. Yeah, it kind of makes me anxious too, but I'm glad I'm faking it really well. So I was one of those kids who never liked reading aloud in class because I trip over words and whatnot. And one of the really great realizations I had when I started doing these online readings is that no one really notices when you mess up. If you've written a good story, they're just paying attention to the story and they don't care about the rest. So yay, it makes me feel better when I read. Now, and Derek says Final Fantasy 15 is the best road trip I ever went on. Yeah, it totally is. Like, Final Fantasy 15 is such a relaxing game to play. Like, I haven't finished it yet because I'm really terrible at finishing any game, even when I like them. But there's just something really, really pleasant about the entire game. And it's like even when you're exploring to music that is essentially a waltz, and I just love it. Like, there are sometimes I'll just be having a really stressful day and I'll just go wander around in Final Fantasy 15. I won't actually do anything because I don't think the combat is all that fun. But when I get to the RPG elements, it's like, you know what? I'm just gonna stay on this one beach. I'm just gonna fish a little bit. I'm just gonna look at these really hot guys because, I mean, let's face it, this is one of the reasons why girls like the Final Fantasy series and especially Final Fantasy 15. But it's a really, really chill, relaxing game, and I love it to death because of that. I do need to finish it though. Let's see other things. Yes, Derek, you do need to check out Food Wars. Ignore seasons 3 and 4 because they lose most of the charm of seasons 1 and 2, but season 5 picks it back up. So they just they go off the rails even for anime in seasons 3 and 4. Let's see here. And so Rose Poppy Cosplay says this is amazing. Thank you. I do my best. All right. So next little part. Drinking some more water here. I'm so dehydrated tonight, you guys. All right. So one comment that a lot of reviewers made on book 1 is that there are some characters that just kind of seem to appear and then they vanish without really being used. And part of that was totally intentional. One of the things I wanted to do in book one was set up an ensemble cast. And some things I throw in books specifically so that they're there for me to use later. And two characters that were kind of there. Well, excuse me, burped. One character was there intentionally, Hati, which you met her a little bit in what I read today. She's the 7-foot tall cat girl pop star alien thing. She is a character who I actually invented her for a separate series that I may or may not ever write. It's kind of one that I wrote back in college, and I haven't really found the spark that makes me want to continue that one yet, like the thing that the plot hinges on. But I really, really liked her character, and so I inserted her into Monster Punk Horizon because she's weird enough already that she would fit in well. And I had intentions of using her later. The second character that pops up later is Dwayne. And if you have read book one, you know Dwayne. If you haven't read book one, Dwayne is this character who he's this really, he looks like a human with the head of a vampire bat. He's just this really terrifying looking character, but he's got his, metal band tee and his jeans. And despite his sort of terrifying appearance, he's just kind of this lovable guy. And I threw him into book one because I just needed a character to push a scene along, but I ended up kind of falling in love with him. And then when it came time to write book two, I was working around some scenes with Hati, and the two of those characters just kind of fell in together and complemented each other well, especially in terms of their interests, because they are both musicians. And music, for me, music is one of those things where I consider myself a talented person when it comes to the arts and humanities and things, but music is never something I've been good at. And so people who are musicians are kind of like wizards to me. And so I like to write musicians for that reason, because it's like I'm going to live vicariously through my characters. But one of the reasons why I introduced Hati as a musician was because I wanted to do, well, let me back up. In fantasy, there's a rich tradition of musical characters, especially in the form of bards. And most of the time they're comedic or whatever. But technically in this series, the whole cast of characters is the comedy relief. So I didn't really intend to use bards for that function in this one. But also in Monster Hunter, there's a weapon called the hunting horn, where if you haven't played Monster Hunter, they basically have certain patterns and songs associated with them where you can play and this song will give this buff or this debuff or something like that. It's not a weapon that I play that often, and it's also something that it's so distinctly Monster Hunter that I didn't want to put a hardcore, like this is definitely a hunting horn in the series. At least in terms of a main character, because you do have a random bagpipe that shows up in book one. But I did want to have some kind of musical component, and I wanted to have that music somehow contribute to battles. And so in the next scene I'm going to read, you begin to see a little bit of how music works in this setting. Now, music is not necessarily magical in this setting, but what I kind of took my cues from was that even though music is not necessarily magical even in our world, it can definitely have very specific and very intense psychological effects on people. Like, it's why you always have like really, really energetic, pump you up music before a sports game instead of, say, Mozart and stuff like that. And so in this setting, the characters, they have their sort of let's get pumped music that they play for various things, but they also have certain songs that they play where they're designed to have certain effects on certain monsters. For example, if they want to try to frighten or somehow disorient a monster, they play sounds and songs that addle those creatures that just sometimes, and I mean, humans, this happens with us too. Like sometimes you just hear a song that makes you want to not hear anything at all right at that moment. And so that's kind of where that takes its inspiration from. And so you're going to see a little bit of how music functions in this setting. In the next scene, you're also going to meet one of the most significant monsters in this particular book. Now, more water. All right. So now the monster that you meet is called the Pirajka. And in terms of the lore of Monster Punk Horizon, this is actually one of the earliest monsters that that young hunters go after. And when I was designing them, I wanted to pay another homage to Monster Hunter World with them. In Monster Hunter World, the very first monster you hunt is the Great Jagras, which is this enormous lizard, and it has this little pack of just regular Jagrases that follow it around. And I wanted to have some sort of reptilian pack creature thing be the first monster that my characters meet because of that. So I was coming up with stuff, and then the name Pirajka came to me, and I just thought it sounded cool. So I was like, okay, what kind of monster would have this name? And my brain eventually came up with this sort of, not a reptile, but an amphibian, a sort of weird, sporty, frog-like monster that has the head of a piranha. And it's one of the simplest monsters in the entire series, but it's one of my favorites just because I really love the way its name sounds, and I really just love the sort of slick, sleek look of this monster, at least as it appears in my head. As described, like a frog with a piranha head, it probably looks really stupid in real life, but it looks cool to me. Now, with this monster, I also wanted to to begin to fit in some Pokemon references. I do frequently describe this series as a love letter to Pokemon and Digimon and Monster Hunter and whatnot. But with this particular arc of the series, obviously the Monster Hunter references are the heavy ones. And so I wanted to begin to find ways to sneak references from the other inspiration series in. And so what I did with the Pirajkas was I have them evolve Pokemon style. They have, so a lot of the other monsters don't necessarily evolve, but these can evolve into distinct forms under distinct circumstances. Like, it's not like, oh my gosh, the Pirajka just reached this level and now it's the next thing. It usually has something to do with pack leadership and whatnot. And in this scene, what you meet is the next level of the Pirajka. And when I was designing the next level, I was like, okay, we're going to try to do another Pokemon reference in here. And so I was thinking, okay, what kind of monster can I refer to? And it was very easy. It came to me. Charizard is one of the single most iconic Pokemon. It's already a lizardy dragon thing. And so it just seemed natural to pay some sort of reference to that. And so you only really see it in print once, but I kind of, in my own headcanon for my series, adopted Zard as a suffix that just happens occasionally. And so the second level of the Pirajka is called the Pirajka Zard. But also one of the bits of logic that went into the creation and the design of the Pirajka Zard, it was basically, I want to do a Charizard but wet. That's pretty much it. Water Charizard was this monster. And so this is another look into the crazy random places my imagination goes when it's coming up with monsters and whatnot. Do I have any other notes before I read? Let's see here. Let's see. All right. Nope. That is the end of my notes for that. And so I am going to read my next little scene. And this is actually from close to the middle of the book. By this point, Kaito has gotten all kitted up. He's going out on his first hunt, and the characters, they, prior to this scene, they've noticed that something weird is going on with Pirajkas, and so they're going about and investigating this particular pack of Pirajkas that's behaving strangely, and that's where we pick up. Frog sign, Sacha suddenly reported. He pointed to a mess of tracks on the ground and waited for the other hunters to step nimbly around the indicated spot. Kaito followed too, and saw them after squinting, a set of spread-toed, clawed impressions in the soil. Oh, we got a visitor. Hey, Nova. You coming? Come faster, babe. She's just screaming behind me. She'll come up here in a little bit. I lost my place, Nova. What are you doing? She's walking around me deciding whether don't you walk back there. Nova has a habit of stepping on my power strip and turning my computer off whenever I'm working, and we don't need to do that tonight, babe. Okay, she's just going to lay down behind me. I will hold her up later so you can say hey. Now, finding my place again. All right. Kaito followed too and saw them after squinting, a set of spread-toed, clawed impressions in the soil. They're fresh. You can tell by how clean the lines are, Pix explained for Kaito's benefit. And the toes are webbed. This is a saltwater Pirajka. Oh, here's another cool thing, which I will get back to the reading a little bit after this. So when I create monsters, I generally try to bring in some ideas from existing real-world animals. And what I do essentially is I go to the children's section of my local library, and it's rife with books about just weird, cool animals and unique things that they do. And as I was coming up with just random monster ideas for the story itself, I came across this. I thought Nova meowed. I came across this one particular kind of frog, and I forget the name of the frog right now, actually. Most amphibians cannot switch between saltwater and freshwater. If you put one in the other, if you take one that's accustomed to one and then put it in the other, it will not do well. But there's this one particular kind of frog that it takes its body some time to transition, but it can essentially go from one environment to the other, and it's the only frog in the world that can do that. And so that became one of the inspirations for the Pirajka. Don't step on my power cord, Nova. And how it's and how it functions in this world. All right, pick it up again. We'll finish this reading eventually. All right. Then let's follow them, Jaz said. Kaito proceeded behind Pix as she traced the Pirajka's tracks. The trail led deeper into the jungle, away from the ocean. As it did, everyone in the party indicated relevant monster sign to Nova. Make up your mind. Okay, she's coming up to say hey, you guys. So I'm going to hold the cat up so she can say hello to everybody. Hey! She's like, what are you doing? Why can't I see me on the screen? Okay. She's like, I'm done. I promise you guys, Nova usually looks so cute in photos and videos, and then I get her up during streams, and she's just like, put me down. Okay, you're going back in my lap. Stay there. And hopefully we will be able to finish this reading now. All right. I'm picking up again. We're for real. I'm going to continue this time. The trail led deeper into the jungle, away from the ocean. As it did, everyone in the party indicated relevant monster sign to Kaito. Broken foliage and branches, claw marks on trees, and splatters of blood, mucus, or feces to help familiarize him with the environment. Kaito nodded to each one. Though he didn't have images to associate with most of the monsters they mentioned, it made him feel better to at least hear minor details about them. Besides, none of the monsters the party had described thus far sounded particularly dangerous, at least to someone of their tier, and Kaito almost began to feel at home. That was when he stepped in a pile of dung that came over the top of his boots, its contents filled with hundreds of tiny skulls. To his credit, Kaito held in a disgusted shriek, but whatever noise he did make was enough to make his whole party look back at him. Ah, that'll be a raging buttlord's evacuation, Pix said. Are those really skulls? Kaito squeaked. They're bone berries. Nova poked one with a stick. Yes, this Nova is based on my Nova, in case you didn't know. Or really, the skins of bone berries. They can't digest the skins, and so they keep their shape when they get filled up with... She lowered her voice as if she was about to say something she wasn't supposed to. Poop. They're herbivores, though, Jaz said, and usually pretty chill unless you piss them off. Why are they called raging buttlords, then? Kaito asked, scraping his nasty boot across a nearby root. Just then, a loud, pissed-off noise suggested he was about to get his answer. It sounded like a belched combination of a moo and a honk, and dangerous not in a predatory way, but in the way that a cow could be dangerous if you annoyed it and were in a position to be easily trampled by a deceptively placid-looking herd. Kaito's gut shriveled at the sound, at the memory of the videos he'd seen in history class, but in truth, he'd been terrified of that kind of noise even before school had exposed him to the footage. Some pieces of history left scars on society that spanned the ages, and the sound of a moo was one of those for his society. It had been one of the darker defining events in his world's history. An animal rights organization decided that people would be less likely to eat beef if the beef fought back, and so teamed up with a terrorist cell specializing in virally induced gene modifications to create a hyper-aggressive yet hyper-intelligent variant of cow. It was perhaps one of the strangest cases of politics making for strange bedfellows, and one unintended result was a brand new breed of cow that could strategize brutally. Paradoxically, the efforts actually raised the consumption of beef when the herds of genetically modified cows grew into such a threat it became necessary to hunt them in excess. But on the upside, it did place a new urgency and emphasis on the growing space travel sector. The problem had been ameliorated in the intervening centuries, but there was no denying the connection between his world's proliferation of space stations and that weird period in history where you did not F with cows. This creature sounded like those cows. It was not the sound of a creature Kaito wanted to piss off. Pix held up a fist, calling for silence, and the party slinked forward on quiet footsteps. Sacha and Nova went before everyone else, on feet as silent as a midnight mist, even as they launched into the branches of the trees overhead. Kaito followed apprehensively, that deep cultural scar surging adrenaline through his veins before he was even sure he needed it. But strangely, once he caught a glimpse of the creature, it helped to assuage some of his instinctive fear. The raging buttlord didn't look like a cow. Rather, it looked something like a bipedal, tiny-armed dinosaur with a flat-toothed, herbivorous face, a great set of ram-like horns, and an articulated shell of armor that covered its spine, back, and upper legs. Of course, none of these were its most defining element. That was its butt, which, despite belonging to a thoroughly non-human creature, looked like it had been transplanted from the kind of websites he tended to delete from his data frame history. Frankly, it was somewhat disturbing how perfectly formed that monster butt was, but it also belonged to a creature that was not a cow, so that made it somewhat less terrifying in comparison. It still wasn't a creature Kaito wanted to piss off, but it also sounded like the creature was already there and being further pissed off by a host of gurgly croaks. Those must be the Pirajkas. Pix had gestured for them to stop in the cover of surrounding foliage, so he couldn't see the specific details of the situation clearly. That was what Sacha and Nova were for, and soon Sacha's report came back through their earworms. I see 5 of the things, all saltwater by the rusty stripes, but not an unmanageable pack size. Any Zards? Jaz asked. Not in this pack, Sacha replied. How big's the prey? Pix inquired. It's not an adult, Sacha said. In fact, I think... It's Toot! Nova wailed through their earworms, and from the way Jaz snatched at her greatsword, Kaito guessed this Toot was another of Jaz's attempted pets, or something like it. If you don't know Toot, just read book 1. Pix threw up another hand to stop her before she did something stupid, then promptly projected, Dwayne, I think this would be a good time to test your guitar. Nova, got your paralily ready? I do, Nova beamed. Then that's our plan. Paralyze them, then capture them. Only kill if necessary. Got it? What's our plan B? Jaz inquired, as if she expected to need one. Got your flash bombs, Sacha? Pix asked, as if she didn't disagree. Gotcha, Sacha replied, and Pix nodded. If things start to go sour, I'll be bait. You daze them with your flash bombs, and the rest of you go in and wail on them until they're capturable. Got it, everyone affirmed, then looked to Dwayne. Dwayne slung his guitar around to his front, tested his strings, adjusted his tuning pegs to his liking, and then breathed in and clicked his guitar's eyebrow into angry mode. Okay, so I gotta describe Dwayne's guitar for you guys. It's basically a big old skull with gems in it, and it's enormous and huge and really badass looking. So it's described in an earlier chapter, but I might actually go back and read that because it's awesome. Or maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, Dwayne has a really cool guitar made out of monster bones. Let's see. Oh, I lost my place. All right. Dwayne slung his guitar around to his front, tested his strings, adjusted his tuning pegs to his liking, and then breathed in and clicked his guitar's eyebrow into angry mode. It's got a little clicky eyebrow thing. The purple-red gems in his guitar's eye sockets lit with a hellish ferocity. A magical wind blasted out from the gems and through the cavities of the skull that formed his guitar until they shrieked out of the mouth in a howl that challenged the archetypal evil from every pantheon to come effing get some. The initial howl had hardly faded before his blunt-clawed fingers shredded against the monster gut guitar strings, tearing a riff through the air that was so complex and so overwhelming the entire jungle seemed to tense at the new, unnatural sound. The opening riff done, Dwayne hurled forward with a throaty growl and a furious headbang that sent his beard and mane flying like a manic berserker's. as a great glow spread up through the guitar's multicolored gems to the tune of his war cry. So distracted was he by the spectacle that Kaito had completely forgotten about the Pirajkas, and when he crept over to the side of the monster battle, he saw that the Pirajkas had forgotten themselves too. The entire herd stood, petrified by this bizarre noise, like a herd of deer in front of incomprehensible headlights. They were totally vulnerable. "Get 'em, princess!" Dwayne wailed through his song, sounding less like himself and more like a, well, bat out of hell. But Nova wasn't frightened by the noise. She leapt out of her tree onto the backmost monster and bopped her wand against its head with a gentle, whispered, "Bam!" She continued leaping from monster to monster, bopping each with the same breathy "bam," as if she were playing little more than a violent game of duck, duck, goose. Each monster fell under her wand, twitching under the restraint of her magic. Was it really going to be that easy? Kaito wondered. Had he rolled a 20 after all? Was he going to succeed at his first hunt without even drawing his weapon? No, of course he wasn't. For Sacha suddenly cursed, "Dung! More Pirajkas on the way!" "That shouldn't be a problem," Pix said. "Not with these 5 fully paralyzed." "Something's wrong with these. They're not moving normally," Sacha reported, and soon the party saw what Sacha meant. A pack of 5 more Pirajkas swarmed into the clearing, and even though Kaito had only just seen his first Pirajkas, he knew that these were clearly not right. They prowled with jerky, twitchy motions, and their eyes darted with simultaneous hyper-attentiveness and distraction, as if they were hunting not for a meal, but their next fix. And in the way of creatures on sense-altering drugs, they weren't reacting to their environment like the sober Pirajkas. "Oh, dung, they're not responding to the song," Sacha snapped. "Amp it up, Dwayne. Throw in some more cusses or something." Dwayne did. Kaito wasn't quite sure they were cusses, but whatever he'd added to the song made it sound like the kind of music that might open a portal to every circle of hell simultaneously if he played a wrong note or didn't time his headbangs and hair flips just so. Kaito swore he could see Dwayne's eyes glowing red with the energy of his playing. That was when all hell did break loose. The new Pirajkas weren't interested in toot. They saw an easier target and swarmed, snapping for the tasty little morsel of a cat perched on top of their twitching fellow. Nova let out a terrified wail and then disappeared beneath the wave of ravenous bodies. "Oh, heck no," Kaito heard Pix snap. She darted past him, capacitor blade drawn and crackling, her normally placid face hard in a scowl that was ready to murder any creature that dared put a scratch on Nova's armor. Kaito was inclined to run after her, but then noticed that Jaz hadn't and remembered Plan B. Instead, she waited with her greatsword at the ready. He unsheathed his longsword and did the same. Pix's shout briefly drew the attention of the new Pirajkas, and that was all the time she needed. "Flash bombs incoming," Sacha snarled, and suddenly a brilliant blast of light exploded in the midst of the Pirajkas. Kaito shielded his eyes just in time and uncovered them to see Jaz now darting into the fray, her shaded goggle lenses pulled down over her eyes for protection against the flash. He followed without thinking, positioning the point of his longsword for a basic forward thrust. The muscles of his hands fell into place as if he'd been hunting monsters for most of his life, which really he had, if not in this exact context. Okay, some context here. When Kaito played video games in his home world, he could basically go into workout mode, which basically overlaid the video game over his senses and made it so that physical things that he did in real life were reflected inside the game. So he could basically beat up monsters and work out at the same time. And so he has muscle memory for certain specific attacks. Okay, continuing. I lost my place again. Okay, the muscles of his hands fell into place as if he'd been hunting monsters for most of his life, which really he had, if not in this exact context, and he lunged forward like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He pinpointed the nearest dazed monster and aimed his sword for its center. But there was just one problem. The new Pirajkas weren't dazed. Whatever had altered their senses was obviously enough to render flash bombs a negligible obstacle, and now the 3 that weren't swarming Nova lunged for them. Jaz swung the blunt side of her sword into the rush of oncoming Pirajkas and batted them away like a barrage of big, chunky baseballs, straight into the first pack of paralyzed Pirajkas. Hard enough to undo Nova's paralysis entirely. The first group of Pirajkas wobbled and shook their heads in confusion as the newcomers scrambled over them. But soon they woke up fully, and they also turned their eyes on the party. "Oh, dung," Sacha cursed again. "That wasn't the whole pack. There's 10 more on the way, and one's a Zard." "The great kind?" Pix struggled, slashing her blade against one of the Pirajkas on Nova. "No, the crap kind," Sacha replied, then clarified, "Regular Pirajka Zard. The great Pirajka Zard is the final version of the Pirajka Zard." The 10 new monsters then scrambled into the clearing, their movements as jerky as the previous 5s, except for one, the obvious Pirajka Zard. This one had the head, feet, and coloration of the others, but that was where the similarities ended. For this Pirajka Zard stretched to the height of Jazz's greatsword, about twice as tall as a regular Pirajka. Ragged blue and green gems sprouted from its spine and from the base of its throat like serrated horns, eager to savage its opponents. It stood upright on massive muscular hind legs made for jumping, with a long meaty tail that looked like it would provide the support for truly bone-shattering kicks, much like a kangaroo's. Its arms were insubstantial compared to those legs, but still distinct in that they were long and tipped with savage sickle claws that might as well have been scimitars. And whatever had addled its pack hadn't addled it. The Zard gazed out with the cold eyes and savage teeth of a predator, and it slinked around the edge of the clearing with the careful, precise footsteps of a creature seeking the best cut of meat for itself. Question was, which one of the hunters did it consider the best cut? And that is the end of that scene. Well, not the actual end. The action scene continues, but that's the end for tonight. And that is actually, let's see, we're getting pretty close to an hour. So I think that is bringing our launch party to its end. So thank you again, everyone, for joining me. This was a whole lot of fun. I got a whole lot of good comments here and a lot of names I recognized from before. So again, all of you are going to be entered to win signed copies of Isekai Skies. Don't forget, if you already own it, either PM me or email me your little Amazon confirmation number, and you will be entered to win a signed copy of Excess as well, which is book 3. The paperback is not actually out yet, I expect that it will be out within the next 1 to 2 weeks. It just kind of depends upon whenever Amazon shoves that through. But they'll be in the mail once I have them in hand. So if you would like some new books, plenty of opportunity for new books tonight. So, and of course, it's just because I have to say it, it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle Unlimited. Please read it, love it, review it, tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody, tell random people in the coffee shop. The more people who read this series, the more of it I will be able to write. So if you enjoy it, tell the world. But again, you guys, thank you for coming. It's been a blast, and I will see you again next month when I do all these videos all over again for book 3. So thank you. Bye.